If you have some finished areas, before you do this next step, we need to put in some plastic wrap just around the finished areas, because this next step will involve some splattering of the plaster as we do apply it. So I take some cut sheets of plastic and I just apply it over some of the pre-finished areas that are on the layout, just to protect those areas from having to do a lot of touch-ups, particularly the track. If you have track, cover the track again, as we did earlier with the saran wrap or any kind of a plastic wrap that will stick to itself and cover parts of the scenery. It's a cheap method and effective. It'll save a lot of repairs and touch-ups and so on later on, which you want to try and avoid. So just a little covering like so. Once a lot of the molds have been put in place, we haven't tried to fill the gaps with just the molds themselves. As you can see, there's a lot of open gaps, and this is what we'll be doing in the next step, is taking care of all those gaps between the rock molds themselves to make them fit together and look like they actually blend, and it's a solid rock. I use slow set or gauging plaster, both the same thing. I mix it into a fairly thick toothpaste consistency. That way I have lots of time when I apply it before it sets, and I got time to work with it. Some of the tools that I use are a basting brush. This happens to be a painting brush for edge corners and so on, but a 1-inch basting brush is very good as well. I also use this is a paring knife. It's good for cutting in tight areas, and sometimes just putting a little bit of plaster on the point for a small area. The odd time I'll use an old toothbrush to sort of scrub and create little strata lines, and a large palette knife or butter knife, something like this, to apply the plaster. The other good tool to use will be a spray bottle, and that is a means of pre-wetting everything, and also for finishing off the plaster once it's been spread, and I'll show you how to do that in a second. So for now, we've got some plaster pressed in here, and just pre-wet it, and we'll just tool it in there. Get a little bit more. This particular area I'm doing here will be fairly smooth and fairly flat, and I got a rock casting right here and it's hollow in behind it, so I just bring the plaster up to the back edge of it and blend it in and pre-wet it all, and then with the brush you can just work all that nice and smooth and brush it smooth. And in the base of the bends I can press the point of the brush into the base, and then flush any plaster on the bend itself with the water. Let it run. Same thing on the other side. Just press the plaster into it, into the base, flush it clean. Now where the front edge of the rock is, we just bring the plaster in over the edge of the rock, and then any hard edges I flush, and make sure it runs all the way across any pre-finished areas. Another important thing to do before you even start any of this is to put a drop sheet on the floor, and I keep some old sheets, some old bedding sheets. I use them to pick up leaves in the yard, many multiple uses, so I spread that on the floor so that any moisture or plaster that drops through, any runoff going on the sheet itself rather than onto the carpet itself when you finish flooring. This is probably the easiest part of creating these rocks. So you'll notice that I've got all these gaps in here from between the molds, and so what we got little gaps where we didn't put castings and so on. So what we're going to do is we're going to fill all these and kind of blend it all together, and it's relatively simple. So first thing I do is it's just pre-wet the area that I'm going to work on, and then just take a spatula or any little tool that you want to use, and I just scrub and force it into those spots, and just keep pre-wetting it if it gets a little bit dry. And then I'll take the brush and I'll just scrub the plaster into those little fissures just to spread and smooth it out, wetting it periodically. You can use different tools just to give it a little bit of shape, but essentially I'm just scrubbing this all into the gaps. And then what I do is on the spray bottle just blast the water into the rock and expose the hard shell that was put up previously. Do another area here and press the plaster in, and again just scrub it in and let it run. In some cases you may want to use your finger to press the plaster in, which is fine. Sometimes it's necessary. And as you can see, I'm not being overly fussy with this because it's rock. It doesn't have to be fussed over too much. The brush kind of spreads the plaster into the little fissures and so on and makes it gap filling. And then just blast away. And I'm working from the top down all the time as well. Spot over here that needs a bit of plaster. Another spot over there. And just fill it, press it in, wet it a little bit, just scrub and blend it. And then just blast away the plaster on the hard shell that was there originally, and let it just flow down. And if it starts to flow down here, it will dry and she'll run, so you got to follow it down the rock and just keep flushing it down to the bottom levels.